Today I'm going to talk to you about how a horse learns. And how a horse learns, there's three different ways that we can kind of determine how your horse learns. And I'm going to talk to you about those three different ways, but first I want to sort of talk to you about, have you ever watched your horse in the pasture with his stall mates? They go out and they're running and they're kicking, but there's cues that they have that are nonverbal cues, because they can't talk to each other, that are nonverbal cues as to how they communicate. So they have to do that in order to decide who's going to eat first, or who's going to go to the water trough first, or who's going to get to stand in the shed first. And so all these things are nonverbal, but they're really important that we see so that we can learn how they work. Horses are prey animals, so their eyes are on the sides of their heads like deer and elk, and they have to be able to see all around them so that they can decide who the predators are and so that they can run away. They also have two hemispheres of their brains. Well, people do too, and those are connected by something called a corpus callosum. And humans have that, and it's a really fast reactive time. Horses don't react that quickly. So consequently, they learn better if you teach one side of their brain and then the other side of their brain. In addition to that, if you watch your horses in the pasture, you can see that sometimes their ears are pinned and sometimes their legs are raised, or sometimes there's lots of body posture that they use to help sort of decide who's going to be the pack leader. So if we watch all of those things, we can see that there's things that we can take from that and learn how to teach them. The first thing is horses they learn from the release of pressure. And a really good example of that is if you've ever been to a racetrack and watched horses on the racetrack, those jockeys have a hold of that horse's mouth all the time. And they learn to push against that pressure. If you're trying to teach your horse something new, you first teach a concept lesson. And you apply as much pressure as needs to happen, and then the minute he releases, or the minute he gives to that pressure, you immediately release that. So that he can get that together in his head, so he can go, okay, the minute I give, I get release. And that's how, then they can build on each one of those steps. It's really, really important. Timing is really, really important. Timing is everything. So when you are asking your horse, let's say you're asking him to back up. So you grab a hold of him, and you're putting pressure on him, and he takes a step back and you don't release, then you've not given him an answer yet. He doesn't know what you want. You've still got pressure on the bit. But if you pick him up and he even thinks about taking a step backwards, you immediately release him. The next time you pick him up, he'll take a step, and you immediately let go of that. And the next time you pick him up and you put pressure on his mouth, and he takes another step, pretty soon you're backing up 100 miles an hour, because he's learned that release is what it takes to get, that release of pressure is what it takes to get him relief. It's no different in the pasture. That's how they work in the pasture. Whoever moves their feet first loses. So if you're watching your horses in the pasture, you can see that that's how they communicate with each other. Ray Hunt, who is a world-renowned horseman, he said one time, you can't make a horse learn something. If you're going to teach something to your horse, you let them learn it. And that's what's called a concept lesson. So if we take what we watched in the pasture and what we know about their brain, and we apply that, we can let them learn something. So if you're trying to teach your horse to side pass, and you put your foot on him, and he even thinks about taking a step, and you immediately take your foot off, that's the release of pressure, and that's how you're allowing him, or you're letting him learn something. You can't force a 1,200-pound animal to do anything. You just can't. And so you have to work with him, and years and years ago, we've all seen old cowboy movies where they all have those big, huge spade bits in those horses' mouths, and they're yanking them around, and their horse's mouth is wide open, and it's horrible. You don't have to do that anymore. It's a huge misconception that horses are hard-mouthed. Everybody used to say, oh, my horse is hard-mouthed, he won't. That's not true. Horses are hard-bodied, and they've not had, their brains haven't had the learning side of their brain, or the thinking side of their brain hasn't had the ability to grow. So if you teach them how to be soft, and you teach them that you will release that pressure, then they don't get hard. And if you've got one that's hard, you can reteach that. It's such an easy concept once we learn how they communicate. So, in conclusion, there's things to remember. Number one is, go watch your horses in the pasture. Whoever moves their feet first loses. Whoever moves their feet first is the bottom of the pecking order. Remember that your horse's brain is split in two levels. You have to teach each side of their brain first. And be patient. Patience is a huge thing. That you can't teach a concept lesson at 100 miles an hour. Teach a little bit at a time, and you'll be shocked at how much your horse will learn.